The story of Mary Collins's disappearance during the pandemic shocked many, especially given the obvious cruelty of her tormentors and their calculated attempt to hide her body. However, the tragedy attracted less attention than one might expect. Jealousy is an expression of one's own insecurity, but sometimes jealousy transforms into one of the most dangerous emotions, which can take over the mind, provoke anger, and escalate from passive aggression to stalking, violence, and an obsession with control. Irrational jealousy can even lead to a crime, and neither material wealth nor a seemingly perfect life guarantees freedom from this feeling. It was jealousy that was to blame for what happened to the unique girl named Mary Collins. She was betrayed by a group of people she considered her friends. Her positive outlook on life made her special, but at the same time vulnerable to others. Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. 20-year-old Mary Santino Collins was born on July 6, 1999, in the family of Casey Del Pezzo. Santino means saint in Italian, and this word perfectly described Mary's sweet personality. She was magnificent with an otherworldly gaze. Her eyes gave her the appearance of an unreal being. Thick hair, which she loved to dye in bright colors, complemented her creative imagination. In childhood, Mary lived with her grandparents Mia and William Olderman. They had a more stable household to provide her with everything necessary, and her mom and aunt helped take care of her. They had a large, friendly family surrounding the girl with love and care. Around 3 months old, her grandmother noticed that Mary had difficulty eating, didn't make eye contact, and didn't recognize herself in mirrors. For almost 3 years, Mia took Mary to doctors, trying to figure out the cause of her granddaughter's strange behavior. The girl was diagnosed with what is known as 22q deletion syndrome. This is a genetic disorder capable of affecting any system in the body, so it manifests differently in each patient. It was also discovered that Mary had a submucous cleft palate. It was assumed that with such a developmental feature, the girl would never be able to speak normally. But, against all odds, she started speaking around 6 years old. Not everyone understood her right away, though over time her speech became more coherent. Only one serious obstacle remained. Mary couldn't make loud sounds like screaming. The genetic disorder also affected her vision, so the girl wore glasses and oriented herself very poorly in space. She could get lost even in her own yard. Grandmother Mia said that describing Mary is like trying to describe a work of art. There aren't enough adjectives to accurately convey how special she was. Due to the diagnosis, her mental abilities lagged behind. At 20 years old, she had the mind of a 15-year-old teenager. Despite her quirky personality, Mary was very loving, caring, and always saw only the good in everything. With strangers, she was a bit shy, but that didn't stop her from being passionate about music and fashion. The girl loved dressing up and doing photo shoots. She used her artistic abilities to create beautiful makeup and hairstyles. In school, Mary hung out with a small group of close friends. As she got older, she started dating boys. But nothing serious came of it, because the girl wasn't interested in the physical aspects of relationships. One of the guys Collins was friends with in school was La Vie Femme. They just hung out together and visited each other's homes. After they broke up, there were no hard feelings between them, and they still remained friends. After graduating high school, Mary's number of friends sharply decreased. Young people her age were going to college, building careers, moving, and starting adult lives. At that time, the girl still had the mindset of a teenager, so their interests didn't match, and her girlfriends, for the most part, began to naturally drift apart. It would seem that such a sweet and innocent girl like Mary wouldn't encounter bullying. That would be as heartless as hurting a harmless, clueless puppy. In school, her brothers and sisters protected her, fiercely shielding her from any encroachments. But in adult life, Collins unexpectedly found that for some reason, she became the target of attacks from an adult girl named Kaylee Lavery. Kaylee was 24 years old. Out of nowhere, she started bullying Mary in every way on social media, going from rude comments under photos to sudden apologies and shows of friendly affection. It was very strange. First, to write that a girl like Mary is needed by no one, and it's better for her to disappear as soon as possible. To advise Collins to work on being less ugly and hope that a bus hits her. And then to start emotionally manipulating Mary and say that they were friends. The girls had never interacted in real life. The only social connection was that Kaylee was dating and living with Lavi Pham, Mary's former boyfriend from school days. Perhaps Lavery knew how charming and interesting Mary was and envied her. And when she realized that she was also vulnerable and even naive, she decided to have fun with her. Mary's family saw her on social media and the comments on the photos. They worried about her and paid attention to this strange Kaylee. But when they tried to warn Mary, the girl declared that Lavery was her friend. Once, Kaylee wrote to Mary that she was just bored, so that's why she was attacking her. She was amusing herself out of idleness, while the other was becoming increasingly insecure because of the constant attacks. Mary realized that her slow speech, glasses, and lack of understanding of many things greatly hindered her in life. Sometimes the most dangerous people are those who seem to have everything, but they constantly remain dissatisfied and ungrateful, getting things without much effort. At some point, unlimited access to everything they want leads to seeking alternative forms of entertainment. This is very similar to the case of Kaylee Lavery, who received a very privileged upbringing. Her father was the chief architect of a company. The family lived in a house worth over $1 million, and the unemployed Kaylee considered this her advantage. She thought that her parents' money somehow made her better than everyone else. The girl enrolled herself among geniuses, boasting about her high school education. However, her behavior showed her real level of intelligence. Once, Mary couldn't take the attacks and asked to be left alone, to which Kaylee replied that her parents were millionaires, so she could treat people however she pleased. And this was said by an adult 24-year-old person. By 2020, Mary had turned 20. Her family still protected the girl very much, who longed to become independent. But the diagnosis hindered her orientation, especially in such a big city as Charlotte in North Carolina, where they lived. It was a major commercial center of the state. One of the especially trendy districts in the city was NODA, which means North Davidson. Here, the artistic scene flourished, and there was a more electric atmosphere. So many aspiring artists and musicians lived and spent time in this area. Mary couldn't work or drive a car. She had to rely on others for transportation. Her carefree nature and inability to manage money made grandmother Mia responsible for her granddaughter's finances. She controlled her expenses and gradually gave out the disability money so that she wouldn't spend it frivolously. Mary also used the family phone plan with her grandmother and grandfather. Mia had an app to track her granddaughter's phone, and the woman could always check the location to ensure Mary's safety. Over time, the girl learned to use the Uber app to call a taxi. And now, she didn't always have to depend on people for rides. The beginning of the pandemic was a time of fear and uncertainty. It was especially hard for young people accustomed to constantly hanging out with friends. The requirements to stay home were an absolute nightmare for those who couldn't spend whole days alone in confined spaces. When the initial hysteria subsided, social distancing was still a problem for sociable people. Mary was in quarantine for several weeks, and by the end of March 2020, she started slowly going crazy. On Saturday, March 28th, Collins received a message from Kaylee. Lavery invited her to visit the apartment in the NODA district to have a movie marathon. Mary was a bit worried because of that stormy history between them on social media, but the girl apologized for some rude words said to Collins, and she, delighted with a new girlfriend, instantly forgave her. Plus, Lavi Pham was there, whom she knew. Mary so desperately wanted to get out of the house that she was ready to run anywhere. Grandmother Mia didn't want to let her granddaughter go at all. She didn't trust Kaylee after all her statements. The woman even tried to intercept the departing Mary by asking the driver not to agree to the trip. But the driver looked at the girl and said that she was already old enough to decide for herself. Collins had no idea that the night of watching movies would turn into a real nightmare. Mia checked Mary's location on her phone a little later to make sure she had safely arrived at the apartment. She wrote several messages to find out when to expect her home, but her granddaughter didn't respond. There was no activity on her social media page either. Then, one of Mary's sisters found a video on Lavi's account where Kaylee and Mary were lounging around, carelessly walking around the apartment and picking up sushi delivery. There was also a moment when Kaylee hugged Mary and smiled at her, as if they had been friends for many years. Mia waited and worried about her granddaughter all night because she still wasn't responding to calls or messages. The woman didn't sleep a wink. And in the morning, not receiving any news from Mary, Mia decided to go to Kaylee's apartment herself to pick up her granddaughter and bring her home. She didn't want to assert her authority over the girl, but it was about her safety. Mia got to the residential complex but couldn't enter the courtyard. The way was blocked by metal gates with a code lock. The door to the building was also locked for outsiders. The woman had to wait until one of the residents came out. When she finally reached the apartment on the 3rd floor, no one opened the door for her. Mia knew Mary was there. The location of her mobile indicated that. She knocked louder and louder, then started shouting and threatening the police, and only then did Kaylee open the door. Mary's grandmother was the last person she expected to see. The girl calmly stated that Collins had already left, and Mia knew she was lying. First, her granddaughter had recently broken her glasses and couldn't have left the apartment alone. Second, Mary wouldn't have left without asking her for money. And third, the app showed that the phone was still inside the apartment. The woman couldn't understand why Kaylee was lying, so she asked permission to personally make sure Mary wasn't there. Mia frantically walked around the apartment, shouting her granddaughter's name. She pulled back the shower curtain, looked in the closets, but there really was no one there. The only place Kaylee didn't let her into was the bedroom. The hostess stated that it was too personal a room for outsiders to walk through, and at the moment, her friends were there. Mia persisted, but Kaylee simply showed her the door. The grandmother started crying and begging the girl, but she just sneered contemptuously, saying she didn't care about Collins. Then the woman started shouting Mary's name over Kaylee's head, hoping that her granddaughter would hear and come out of the bedroom. However, instead, Lavi came out of the room. Mia had no choice but to leave. The woman inspected the complex and other nearby places where Mary could have gotten to on her own, but she was nowhere to be seen. Then she called 911 and asked for help in searching for her granddaughter. However, law enforcement didn't take the grandmother's request seriously. One of the officers went to the specified address, but no one opened the door for him, and he just left. That was the end of the help. The family spent another night desperately worrying about Mary, with whom they had never lost contact before. On March 31st, 2020, the Mecklenburg Police Department accepted an official missing person report. Detective Jonathan Gaskin was assigned to handle the investigation, who stated that he could conduct the case remotely, and it wasn't necessary to physically go to the apartment at all. Mia was dissatisfied that he wasn't talking to anyone, so she decided to return to the apartment herself, but couldn't get there. All the relatives understood that Mary couldn't have just gone somewhere. Either she was being held against her will, or something terrible had happened in that house. The girl's mom printed flyers and hung them in all crowded places. Mia called the apartment building's office and asked the manager for the surveillance camera footage from the high-rise. He promised to look at them later. Jonathan Gaskin, the lead detective on the case, didn't want to acknowledge the urgency of the situation and stubbornly didn't understand that Mary was in danger. He knew the girl was already 20 years old, but the family was going crazy for some reason. In his opinion, at that age, a person can already take care of themselves. He didn't even want to look at the recorded video material to confirm that Mary had left the apartment. Mia saw that the police were wasting precious time, so she, along with Casey, Mary's mom, went to Kaylee's apartment again. Beforehand, she called 911 to enlist the help of law enforcement. This time, Lavi opened the door. He allowed Casey to enter and inspect the rooms, but refused to let the officer in for a search. The woman nervously looked around the apartment. She even peeked into the bedroom where someone was sleeping, covered with a blanket. Lavi said it was Kaylee, so Casey continued moving. She didn't know there was another bathroom in that room. Meanwhile, the officer went to the manager, and for some reason said they no longer needed to look at the surveillance camera footage, because they didn't have a warrant. But that was stupid, because the manager himself didn't need a warrant to view it. Several days later, when the police finally decided to seize the recorded material, it was too late. All the footage from the previous period had been erased because a new month had begun. And what was most offensive, the recordings were deleted just an hour before the detectives applied with a warrant. This was one of many mistakes in the investigation of this case. In light of the police's directed actions and their lack of concern about Mary's disappearance, the family had no choice but to take everything into their own hands. They felt completely abandoned by the very institution that is supposed to serve and protect them. The Mecklenburg officers turned out to be indifferent and uninterested. Unwavering love for Mary gave the family the strength and determination needed to conduct their own investigation. The thought of leaving the girl's life to fate was simply impossible. For them, her life was priceless. Collins's loved ones independently organized search parties, reached out through social media to anyone who might have any information, and distributed countless flyers throughout the city. The family took turns staking out the apartment so that Kaylee and Lavi couldn't take anything out unnoticed or get rid of any potential evidence. However, the police insisted on stopping these actions. Since Lavi and Kaylee filed a stalking complaint, they allegedly didn't feel safe when their apartment was constantly being watched. Family friends and other community members helped search for the girl in nearby areas. Relatives even hired drones, and volunteers with search dogs combed the forest, construction sites, and even rummaged through trash containers, but all this without any help from the police. Deep down, the loved ones felt that Mary had actually never left that ill-fated apartment. The family still managed to get permission to visit it, and even arranged to bring in cadaver dogs trained to search for human remains. All they needed was to get the signature of the lead detective on the case, Jonathan Gaskin. But he never responded or called them back in time, and the opportunity to use the dogs was lost. In addition, an anonymous message came to the station that Collins had run away from home before. This was false information, but the department somehow accepted it as fact, without any arguments. And again, precious time was wasted. It took a whole 7 days since Mary disappeared before the Mecklenburg Police Department finally started taking the situation seriously. Grandmother Mia was completely physically and emotionally exhausted. She had protected Mary her whole life, and now had done everything in her power. The woman even resorted to sleeping in the parking lot of that apartment building where her granddaughter disappeared. Meanwhile, relatives browsing social media found photos on Lavi's page with an unfamiliar guy from the days when Mary disappeared. In one of the shots, this person had a knife in his hand. After asking acquaintances, the Collins family learned that it was 22-year-old James Salerno. He was Lavi's childhood friend and lived across the street from him. On April 3, 2020, officers received reliable information confirming what Mary's family had been saying all along. The girl had actually never left the apartment where Kaylee and Lavi lived. James Salerno told one of his buddies that he was at the party that night, and when he arrived, the couple had tied Mary up in the bathtub, beaten her to death, and hidden her body in a mattress. He said they planned to burn the mattress later. Only then did Detective Gaskin finally decide to use his authority and head to the apartment to talk to Lavi and Kaylee. He searched every room and noticed that everything was very dirty. The detective even ordered the owners to lift all the mattresses, but he still didn't see any signs of Mary. The next day, an informant called the police and assured them that the girl was not just under the mattress, but inside it. He also reported another girl who was at the party. It was 18-year-old Salerno's girlfriend named America Dill. James and his girlfriend were witnesses to how Kaylee and Lavi tied Mary up and beat her with a bottle on the head. The reason for everything was that Lavi and Kaylee wanted to have a threesome with Collins, but she refused. Then the hosts allegedly forced Salerno to clean up the bloody mess. His words raised doubts because James is a pretty big guy compared to Lavi. Nevertheless, he said he helped the couple wrap Mary in trash bags and tape her body, after which they placed it in the mattress. Upon hearing this new information, the Mecklenburg police obtained an official search warrant for Lavi and Kaylee's apartment. The detectives focused on the back bedroom, where there was a bed piled with a bunch of things. Before removing the bed, they found a bloody knife in the corner of the room, and next to the bookshelf lay Collins' ID and debit card. Luminol indicated the presence of blood on the bathroom mats and shower curtain, but the sinks and walls gave the strongest reaction. A later forensic examination concluded that despite the obvious attempt to clean up, Mary's DNA was found in 6 places. After all that, the police finally proceeded to inspect the bed. If Detective Gaskin had lifted the mattress himself, he would have realized the first time that it was very heavy. The mattress was taped along the seams, and inside it they found several flattened cardboard boxes, under which lay Mary Collins' body, wrapped in trash bags. The girl was completely doused with pumpkin spice shower gel and dish soap in an attempt to mask the smell. Later, the forensic examination concluded that the fingerprints on the trash bags matched America's Salerno's girlfriend. Also inside were several t-shirts with bloodstains hidden. The mattress springs and material resembling stuffing were piled up in another room. After this discovery, things got even worse. The medical examiner faced a difficult task of figuring out exactly what happened to the girl. He started by pulling her out of 2 large black bags. The body was wrapped in tourniquets and twisted with clothing, presumably to absorb the blood seeping from the wounds. More than 133 cuts and 24 stab wounds were found. All of them were shallow enough not to be the cause of her death. Most likely, Mary was tortured. There were also signs that the girl was subjected to very brutal sexual assault due to the presence of 2 men's DNA found on her body. The DNA results were inconclusive due to attempts to erase the evidence, but it wasn't hard to figure out who they belonged to. Someone warned Mia that an ambulance was approaching the house, and this gave her temporary hope that Mary had been found alive. The woman rushed to the nearest hospital, but they told her Collins wasn't there. The grandmother hurried to another clinic, but due to pandemic restrictions, she couldn't go inside. Almost immediately, they called her on her cell phone and asked her to return home. At home, 2 officers were already waiting for her, who reported the horrific find in Kaylee and Lavi's apartment. Mia couldn't even listen to all the details. She was in too much rage from grief and from realizing that her granddaughter could have been saved if the police had responded immediately to the request for help. The lead detective, Jonathan Gaskin, couldn't even meet Mary's relatives face to face, now realizing that they were right from the beginning. After everything that happened, the Mecklenburg police needed to determine how involved each person who was in the apartment that night was in Collins' death. From text messages between Lavi and Kaylee, investigators learned that the girl was drugged with strong sedative drugs capable of impairing a person's coordination, lowering blood pressure, slurring speech, and even increasing libido, and often used at parties. The 3 suspects, Kaylee Lavery, James Salerno, and Lavi Pham, were brought in for questioning. Each of them tried to blame everything on each other and minimize their own involvement. Lavi Pham was questioned first. The detectives were shocked by his behavior. The guy stated that he saw with his own eyes how Mary left the apartment the next day, and since then, he hadn't heard anything about her. When the officers made it clear that they didn't believe his story, Lavi didn't want to answer questions and asked for a lawyer. Kaylee Lavery told a practically identical story, adding the fact that Mary and James didn't get along. According to her, she tried her best to help find Mary. As soon as Kaylee realized that the detectives knew more than she thought, she also asked for a lawyer. James Salerno was arrested at his parents' house the night Mary was discovered. He almost completely shifted the responsibility to Kaylee, Lavi, and America Dill. America, sensing something was wrong, didn't wait for arrest and drove across the country to Colorado. However, on May 7th, she personally came to the police station. She was extradited back to North Carolina. Even before the interrogation began, she enlisted the support of a lawyer. And only in October did she finally decide to answer some questions in the presence of a lawyer. According to America, she arrived at the party, got high on illegal substances, and fell asleep. Around 7 a.m., she went home. Later, James picked her up and took her back to the apartment. In the bathtub, she saw a lifeless Mary with small cuts all over her body and one deep cut. There were red stains everywhere. America got scared and wanted to leave, but the three friends threatened to do the same to her if she didn't help with the cleanup. Lavi gave James some money and ordered him and America to go to the store for cleaning supplies, including bleach. When they returned, Kaylee, threatening with a knife, forced her to wrap Mary's body with tape and bags. All this time, James and Lavi laughed and joked about the horrible things they did to Mary. Although all the stories differed, the consistent detail was that Kaylee was the instigator. She stood aside and gave orders while the other three cleaned the bathroom. After all the information became public, more and more people shared their experiences interacting with the suspects, especially Kaylee Lavery. They said she had been bullying Mary online for months. Evidence surfaced that Kaylee targeted other girls as well, including another ex of her boyfriend, Lavi. Other people who knew Kaylee in the past said she was always a master of manipulation, cared only about money and status, and did absolutely everything to ruin the lives of those she considered a threat. But what threat could a 20-year-old girl with the mind of a child pose? Perhaps Kaylee hated and insanely envied Mary's kindness and innocence, which she herself clearly lacked. Collins was the complete opposite of Lavery. Apparently, Kaylee couldn't accept that someone so pure, beautiful, and without material wealth could interest her boyfriend. All the evidence against Kaylee was presented in court. Text messages, witness testimonies, and much more. Everything pointed to premeditation. Kaylee and her team of lawyers realized that the only chance to ever get out was to make a deal. On June 30th, 2022, Kaylee Lavery pleaded guilty to second-degree felony, kidnapping and concealing a human body. She was sentenced to just 32 years with the possibility of parole after 25 years. This deal with Kaylee was another slap in the face for Mary's family. Lavery made a statement addressed to friends from the Collins family, saying she would pray that their souls wouldn't harden after the death of a loved one, and that a higher power would help ease their suffering. For Kaylee, who has a real tattoo of a burning church on her body, to utter a prayer for Mary and her family. It sounded very offensive. The prosecution was initially ready to make a deal with Lavi as well, but after Kaylee's sentencing, they excluded that possibility. Due to the pandemic, all court proceedings slowed down greatly. Fam is still awaiting trial, which currently has no exact date, since the Mecklenburg court system is still far behind after the pandemic. A lot of unresolved cases have accumulated there. Years may pass before Mary's case is finally completed. That wouldn't be so bad if all the defendants were awaiting trial behind bars. However, the Collins family was dealt another blow. Both James Salerno and America Dill are currently out on bail. Their defense team did everything possible so they wouldn't suffer in prison. Defendants are considered innocent until proven guilty. It's unclear why the comfort and needs of potential criminals are placed above the offended feelings of the victim's family. After all, it's obvious that such serious cases should have some priority in consideration. The system failed Mary's family at the moment she disappeared, and the least they could do now is not allow the people who stole her life to just live their normal lives as if nothing happened. The girl, who overcame so many of her speech problems, still didn't have the ability to scream. She couldn't cry out loudly for help when a group of monsters tortured and abused her. Mary worked hard to find her voice. That's why her family created an organization and named it Mary's Voice to achieve justice for the person who meant so much to them. Mary Collins' loved ones want people to know what happened to her. Society must be sure that nothing like this will ever happen again, and Mary's voice will finally be heard. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.